maid of honor gave a toast, revealing my biggest secret in front of 200 guests. I didn't react. I let her finish. Then my husband's attorney stood up. My maid of honor finished her toast at 7:14 p.m. The room was dead silent. She smiled at me like she'd won something. My husband squeezed my hand once. At 7:16, his attorney stood up and read a single document aloud. By 7:20, she was the one asking to leave. The secret she revealed in front of 200 people, 2 open bars, and a string quartet that stopped mid-phrase was the kind of thing I had carried for 6 years. 6 years, folded up tight, kept in a place I didn't visit often. I won't repeat it here, not because I'm ashamed of it anymore, but because it belongs to me. And what she did with it that night is the story, not the secret itself. Her name was Dana. We had been friends since freshman year of college at the University of Georgia. The kind of friendship built in dormitory hallways and late-night study sessions. The kind that accumulates history so fast you mistake volume for depth. I was her maid of honor at her wedding 4 years ago. I caught her bouquet, which she later told her mother I'd grabbed on purpose. I should have filed that detail somewhere useful. I didn't. My husband is Daniel Reeves. He's 34, a quiet man, a corporate attorney who speaks the way he drafts contracts, carefully, with every word, load-bearing. He had known about my secret before he proposed. I told him on our 5th date in a parking garage after a movie because I needed to know whether it would change things before I let myself fall any further. He listened. He asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he said, "Okay, is there anything you need from me about that?" I think I loved him in that parking garage. I'm certain of it now. Daniel had met Dana twice before the engagement. He was polite to her in the way he was polite to everyone, which is to say, attentively. He asked about her job, remembered her answers, asked follow-up questions the next time. Dana told me once, with a laugh that had something jagged underneath it, that Daniel was almost too perfect, too composed. "Doesn't it exhaust you?" she said. "Being with someone who never just reacts?" I told her I found it steadying. She made a face I chose not to examine. The prop that holds this whole story together is a cream-colored envelope. I need you to picture it precisely because it matters. It was 4 inches by 9 inches, sealed with a gold foil sticker, and it sat in the inside breast pocket of Daniel's suit jacket every moment of our wedding day. I knew it was there. I had put it there myself. That morning, after Daniel and I had a conversation I'll come back to, he carried it a whole day without mentioning it. That's the kind of man he is. Dana had been my maid of honor for 11 months. She was organized, enthusiastic, and present in the way that makes you feel looked after. She planned the bachelorette trip to Savannah. She coordinated the bridesmaids' dresses with the kind of precision I would have found exhausting if I'd had to do it myself. She gave the appearance, at every stage, of someone investing herself fully in another person's happiness. I've since had occasion to reconsider what she was actually investing in. The first crack appeared about 6 weeks before the wedding. It was small, and I nearly missed it. We were at the final dress fitting, the 4 of us, me and my 3 bridesmaids, and afterward we went to a wine bar around the corner for what Dana called a final countdown toast. 3 glasses in, she mentioned Daniel's name in a sentence that included the phrase, "when this doesn't work out." I looked at her, she laughed and said she was joking. I said of course, and we moved on, but the word "when" had already done its work. It sat in me quietly, like a splinter you can't locate. The second crack came 2 weeks out. I had given Dana a spare key to my apartment so she could help coordinate vendor deliveries while I was at work. I came home one evening to find her sitting at my kitchen table, alone, with my laptop open. She closed it when she heard the door. She said she'd been using the Wi-Fi because her hotspot was slow. My laptop requires a password to unlock. I didn't say anything. I took the key back the following morning and told her I needed it for a cleaning service. She accepted this without question, which itself told me something. I didn't tell Daniel about either incident. In retrospect, I think I was protecting something I wasn't ready to name. The friendship was real. The history was real. And there is a particular kind of loyalty that functions as denial. I understand now how those things work together. At the time, I only knew that I felt uneasy, in a way I couldn't quite justify out loud. The morning of the wedding, Daniel came to the bridal suite for 20 minutes before the ceremony, which I know is supposed to be bad luck, but we've never been very superstitious. He knocked first. He always knocks first. He came in, looked at me for a long moment and said, "You are extraordinary." I told him he was biased. He said he was informed. Then he sat down and told me something that changed the temperature of the whole day. He told me that 3 days earlier, he had received a phone call. The caller was someone who identified themselves as a friend of mine, though they didn't give a name. They offered to share information about my past, information they suggested would be relevant to someone about to make a significant commitment. Daniel had listened to the entire call without interrupting. Then he had asked one question. He asked whether the caller planned to share this information with me, meaning with me directly. The caller said no. Daniel said, "Then I'd recommend you reconsider your plans for the weekend." He hung up. Then he called his colleague, Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb is a civil litigation attorney who has known Daniel for 12 years. More specifically, Marcus is the kind of attorney who handles matters involving intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and tortious interference. Daniel had described the phone call in full, and Marcus had agreed that depending on what followed, there might be grounds for action. Marcus had prepared a document. It was a formal legal letter, notarized, outlining the relevant statutes and the specific conduct that would trigger their application. It was written on firm letterhead. It was designed to be read aloud in a room to an audience. Daniel had printed it the evening before our wedding and put it in the envelope. "I'm hoping we don't need it," he said that morning, "but I wanted you to know it exists." I sat with that for a moment. My dress was already on. My hair was already done. 200 guests were an hour away from filing into a garden venue in Buckhead, and my maid of honor had apparently placed an anonymous phone call to my husband 3 days before our wedding, attempting to weaponize my history against my marriage before it had even legally begun. I asked Daniel how he felt. He said he felt calm. I believed him. I have never once seen Daniel lie about his emotional state, not because he's incapable of it, but because he considers it inefficient. I told him I loved him. He said he knew. Then he straightened his jacket, and we walked down to the ceremony. The wedding itself was, in the truest sense, beautiful. The garden at the venue was strung with soft lights, the kind that looked like suspended fireflies, and the late October air was cool without being cold. My father walked me down the aisle, which is its own complicated story for another time, and Daniel was waiting at the end of it with the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is entirely at peace with it. I felt, in that moment, something settle inside me that had been restless for a very long time. Dana gave a reading during the ceremony. She read it beautifully. Her voice was steady, her timing was perfect, and she looked at me with what I can only describe as the performance of warmth. I watched her and thought for half a second that I'd misjudged everything, that the phone call had been from someone else entirely, that I was letting paranoia undo something true. Then came the reception and the toasts. My brother went first. Funny, warm, brief. He mentioned an embarrassing family vacation story that got the right kind of laughter. Daniel's best man went second, precise and dry, and genuinely moving in the way that surprises you. Then Dana stood up. She started well. She talked about our friendship in college, the dormitory hallway, the late nights, the way we'd shown up for each other through breakups and job changes and family losses. She talked about how she'd watched me become someone she was proud to know. She was a good speaker. She had rehearsed it. Every person in that room was leaning slightly toward her, the way you do when you trust that someone is taking you somewhere good. And then she stopped. She tilted her head. She looked at me with a smile that had something inside it I recognized as calculation. And she said, "I've always believed the people who love you most are the ones who know you completely. So I think it's only right, on a night this important, that everyone here knows who they're really celebrating." The room shifted, not audibly, but perceptibly, the way a crowd does when the tone of something changes faster than they can process. She told them, not all of it, but enough. The shape of it. The version that, stripped of context, stripped of the years I had spent working through it, stripped of the specific private geography of my life, would land in a room full of strangers as the most reductive possible reading of who I am. She delivered it without cruelty in her voice, which was somehow worse than if she'd been visibly angry. She delivered it the way you deliver a fact you believe entitles you to something. I did not move. I want to be precise about this because people have asked me since how I managed it. The honest answer is that I had been told that morning by the man sitting next to me that this might happen, and that there was a plan, and that the plan required me to let it finish. So I sat with my hands in my lap, and I looked at Donna, and I let the words land where they were aimed, and I breathed, and I waited. She ended the toast. She raised her glass. She smiled at me, directly at me, with a smile of someone who believes they have just altered the architecture of another person's life. She was waiting for the fallout, for the tears, or the confrontation, or the horrified silence that would crack the evening open and leave something permanently broken at the center of it. Daniel squeezed my hand once, then he stood up. He looked at Dana for 1 second, the way he looks at an opposing counsel who has overplayed their hand. Then he turned to the room, and he said, in the calm, carrying voice of a man who has spent 15 years making arguments in difficult rooms, "Before we move on, I'd like Marcus to share something." Marcus Webb was seated at a table to the left of the dais. He was 51, silver-haired, and wearing a charcoal suit that meant business even at a wedding. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He unfolded it with the unhurried ease of someone who has done this in far more adversarial settings and found them manageable. He read it aloud, all of it. The document outlined, by statute, the legal definitions of intentional infliction of emotional distress and tortious interference in the state of Georgia. It referenced, without naming the specific action, the phone call Daniel had received 3 days prior, characterizing it as evidence of a premeditated effort to damage the emotional well-being and marital prospect of a named individual, being me, through the unauthorized disclosure of private information in a context specifically chosen for maximum harm. It noted that the call had been recorded with the caller's implicit consent under Georgia's one-party consent law, because Daniel had put his phone on record the moment the caller began speaking. It concluded by stating that depending on the conduct of the relevant individual at today's event, the parties were prepared to proceed with formal action. It took 4 minutes to read. The room was so quiet during those 4 minutes that I could hear the candles on the tables. I watched Dana's face move through 5 distinct stages in real time. Confusion first, then recognition, then a kind of whitening around the mouth that I have thought about many times since, then the very specific stillness of someone doing rapid calculations they are not winning, and finally, at the end, something I can only describe as the collapse of a posture she had been holding for a very long time. When Marcus finished, he folded the document, placed it on the table in front of him, and said, "Congratulations to Daniel and his bride." Then he picked up his champagne glass and drank. 200 people held their breath for approximately 3 seconds. Then Daniel's aunt, a woman named Roberta, who is 70 years old and has seen more than she lets on, started to applaud. It spread from there. It wasn't the loudest applause of the evening, but it was the most deliberate. Dana sat down. She did not look at me. I leaned toward Daniel and said quietly, "You recorded it." He said, "Of course I recorded it. I thought about the parking garage. I thought about the fifth date and the 2 clarifying questions and the way he had looked at me and said, 'Okay, is there anything you need from me about that?' I thought about the envelope in his breast pocket, that cream-colored envelope that had been there all day, carried through the vows and the photographs and the first dance like a quiet piece of armor. I said, 'I'd love you.' He said, 'I know. I love you too. Do you want to go dance?' So we went and danced. Dana asked to leave at 7:20. I know the time because the event coordinator mentioned it to me the following week, noting that one of the bridal party had requested a car early and she wanted to make sure everything was all right. Dana did not speak to me before she left. She did not send a message that night. The first communication I received from her was an email 4 days later, while Daniel and I were in Portugal on our honeymoon, which I read once and then did not open again for 3 weeks. When I finally read it in full, it was long. It moved through the same stages her face had moved through at the reception. Confusion reframed as hurt, recognition reframed as betrayal, and the collapse of her posture reframed as a claim that she had only ever been trying to protect me. She had decided, she wrote, that Daniel was controlling and isolating me, that my secret was proof of a pattern she was worried about, that her toast had been an act of love. She used the phrase, "your best interest," 4 times. She used the word I 47 times. I counted. There was one line that I read twice. She wrote, "You have always let men make you smaller." I sat with that for a long time, in a hotel room in Lisbon, with the windows open and the sound of the city below, thinking about what it means to be known by someone who has decided in advance what the knowing should confirm. I thought about the dinner table in college, where Donna had once spent 20 minutes talking me out of a job offer because she thought the commute would be too hard on me. I thought about the bouquet and the word when. I thought about the closed laptop and the borrowed key and the anonymous phone call and the toast. I thought about what it looks like when someone who loves you is also quietly invested in your smallness. How those things can coexist for years before one of them surfaces completely. Daniel was on the balcony when I came out. I told him what the email said. He listened without interrupting, the way he always does. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said I wanted to forward it to Marcus. He said that was a good idea, so I did, and then I put the phone down and we watched the city for a while without talking, which is one of the things I love most about being married to him. Marcus filed a civil complaint 6 weeks after the wedding. I won't detail the full legal arc here because it is ongoing and because some of it belongs to the lawyers and the calendar and the particular machinery of consequences. What I will say is that the recording held up exactly as Marcus said it would, that Dana retained her own attorney, who sent an initial letter describing the filing as frivolous, and that the letter became noticeably less confident in tone over the following months as discovery proceeded. I've thought a great deal about the moment I chose not to react, about sitting at that table in my wedding dress with 200 people watching and choosing stillness. I want to be clear that it was not composure in the way people sometimes mean it, a kind of above-it-all detachment. It was something more specific. It was the decision to trust the person beside me, to believe that the envelope existed for a reason, and that the reason would arrive in its own time, and that my job in that particular moment was simply to remain. There was a version of that evening in which I reacted the way Dana expected, in which I stood up, or broke down, or said something I would have to carry afterward, in which the night became about the rupture instead of about the marriage. I think she had rehearsed that version. I think she had been rehearsing it in some form for a long time. That version didn't happen. Instead, the envelope arrived. The document was read. The room witnessed something it hadn't expected, which was not chaos, but precision, not cruelty, but consequence. And at the end of the evening, Daniel and I danced until the venue asked us to stop, and then we kept going for another 3 songs in the parking lot while his Aunt Roberta sat on a folding chair and watched us and said nothing, which from Roberta is the highest possible form of approval. The secret Dana revealed that evening is mine. It has been mine through every version of my life, including the versions I'm not proud of. Daniel knows it. My closest family knows it. What Dana understood, I think, is that a secret can be used most effectively not when it destroys someone, but when it reframes them, when it takes the version of you that the people around you have built, the careful architecture of how you are known, and introduces a crack. She wanted to crack the architecture on the first night of my marriage. She wanted to be standing there when it came apart. Instead, she left at 7:20. She left in a car she requested herself, with the document still sitting on Marcus's table, and the recording still on Daniel's phone, and the 200 people still sitting in their chairs, talking, drinking, living the evening forward rather than stopping it where she had aimed. The cream envelope, as far as I know, is still in Daniel's jacket pocket. He hung the jacket in the closet when we got home from Portugal, and neither of us has moved it. I asked him once, a couple of months ago, why he hadn't taken it out. He thought about it for a moment. He said, because I might need it again. I laughed. He was not entirely joking. That's the kind of man he is. The kind who thinks 5 steps ahead. The kind who records a phone call on instinct, who contacts his attorney before the ceremony, who carries an envelope all day without mentioning it because he wants you to be present, not guarded. The kind who says okay in a parking garage and means it fully, without reservation. People ask me, since the story got out the way it did, whether I miss Dana, whether I grieve the friendship. It's an honest question and it deserves an honest answer. I don't miss her. I miss the version of her I believed in, which is a different thing entirely. That version was careful and warm and fiercely loyal. It's possible she was some of those things, some of the time. It's possible she meant some of what she said in the email. Grief is not always clean or categorical, and the end of a long friendship leaves an outline that takes a while to stop noticing. But I watched her face in that room. I watched it move through all 5 stages, and somewhere in the middle of those stages, in the whitening around the mouth and the collapse of the posture, I saw something I recognized. I saw someone who had believed completely that they knew how the evening would end, who had built a plan around a certainty that turned out to be wrong, who discovered in front of 200 people that the person she was trying to diminish had not been diminished, and that the person she had never quite trusted had been carrying a cream-colored envelope since morning. I felt something in that moment that I want to be careful to name correctly. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction in the petty sense. It was something quieter and more durable. It was the feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the right person, on exactly the right night, and of knowing, with a certainty that has not left me since, that you are not small. You have never been small. You just had to wait for the right room to find out. Thanks for watching.